Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you are interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. Today we have Eathan Janney, who is a good friend of mine, who's the co-host of Edge of NFT. Hello, Eathan. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Mark? Good to see you, as good I do every week.
Yes, great to have you on my podcast. Really looking forward to this, talking through your journey to success and what you're doing at the moment with the Edge of NFT podcast. But the first question I always ask is, what does business mindset mean to you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to launch with. You know, when I think about business mindset, I think about just value and understanding how value is exchanged as among us human beings, right? And I think as we talk through the session today, people find out I'm involved in Web3, which includes some cryptocurrency and NFT projects. And what I'm really excited about within all of that stuff is it's really been a sandbox for us as human beings to really more deeply explore how we exchange value, be that different modes of currency that are fungible, like, dollar-like tokens that people can trade, or non-fungible, which, have an analog to art, or kind of collector's items, those things that we trade that have value, but they don't have an unlimited supply that you can exchange for one another. So when I think about why I love business, I love that ability to create value from nothing, just because you have a great idea or great relationships or the ability to build something that nobody else could put together. And I think that the more people think that way about business, the more successful they're going to be.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the answer. So we'll go into education. So you've had a pretty varied education, which is interesting. So your first degree was in music, specializing in jazz piano. So why did you choose music, and specifically why the jazz piano?
Yeah, it's a good question. My first year of school, I actually chose to do a degree in physics at a small local school outside of Chicago where I was living. And it felt very practical. And I came from a not too privileged background. It wasn't horrible, but I felt like there was a lot of, kind of fighting I had to do to make my way, into a middle class, even lifestyle. And so I had done a lot of hard work. As in my high school years, I'd learned a lot, done a lot of studies, got good grades and stuff like that. And I was at the same time passionate about music. And I was so passionate about music while I was at this school called Lake Forest College outside of Chicago that I would be practicing piano day and night. I would sneak in the practice rooms. I can say this now because it's many, many years later. In the middle of the night when it was locked, I'd find a window that you could open. I'm sure the security is much better nowadays. And I just practice all night. I'd fall asleep on the piano bench. I'd fall asleep on the room, practice room floor. And to me, it said, you know what? I think even though there's a lot at stake here, Eathan, coming from the background you have, you deserve to, what I saw, kind of pursue a lifestyle that some of the wealthier kids might be able to, which is, learn something that was culturally enriching as my studies for school. And so basically my sort of behind the scenes plan that I didn't really share super widely was I want to study this because I have a passion about it. I know I'm a smart guy and I could make ends meet however I do. And in the meantime, I'm going to become the best artist and musician that I can and pursue that line of study. And so that was kind of what led me to pursue jazz piano. I had some friends that were also studying music, ended up going to the same school that they were at, Rutgers University, got a really good education there. And I'm super happy I did that. And the last thing I'll say about that is I reflect a lot on, what we do with our life and what you have the capacity to do at different times in life. And I thought, I'm a young guy. Like I gotta do what I want to do. I can't pass up the opportunity to be a 20 something and not be, playing music, touring with a band, exploring that kind of lifestyle. So I'm glad I did all that.
So we're going to jump onto you as a performer and then we'll go back to your master's and a PhD. But so you then became a pianist and a performer. What did you learn in the craft, not just the technically learning how to play the piano, but actually to be a performer in front of a crowd, with interacting with the crowd, paying guests? How did you develop as a performer?
Yeah, I think some of the things you mentioned up front, yes, I see this now. It's almost so instinctual that I don't realize how difficult it can be for other people. I have a much better ability to get in front of people, put myself out there, hold attention, right? Think about how people, what entertains people, what educates people, what makes them want to be present, stuff like that. And so I learned a lot about just kind of the presentation aspect of being an entertainer and a performer and things like that. And my internal interpretation of what music is because I started out very interested in the technical aspects of music. I would learn piano, want to know my scales and chords and all this stuff. And I think I had this naive perspective of music as a young person that the better technically you were, the more successful you'd be as a musician. And I think what I've learned over the years is that music, at least the way that I see it, is way more integrated than that. It's really a cultural phenomenon that incorporates community, other forms of art, the context historically that you're in and what your music has to do with that. It's really, even though the technical skill is very important, it is far from like the only thing that will make you successful as a musician. So I learned that. And the one other thing that I would highlight is I learned to let go a little bit. I had this sort of very focused, intense perspective, very studious, having been more of like a good student on the academic side of things. And people would watch me play and my shoulders, I would have this kind of posture and my shoulders would come up and, you see it, you see the musicians do like that. And I learned it from watching musicians kind of get in these weird contorted shapes, but I would get feedback from people that say, you got to relax, man, when you're playing. You just look way too stressed out. And I was like, no, that's just my mannerism, And I really had to take that feedback in. And when I really got a lot better at piano, I did this thing there's a musician called Kenny Werner, and he had this program for jazz musicians, which is kind of a very niche thing. And it's called Effortless Mastery.
Okay.
And it was a series of audio programs, which got you into like a meditative state, where it would kind of put you in this mindset that you really had to relax and let go and be a lot more intuitive in order to kind of pass a certain barrier as a musician. And if I hadn't gone through that process, I wouldn't. There's a whole lot of stuff that I wouldn't have gained. I gained a lot in like understanding music and other domains about the ability to kind of let go and lose control in a way that allows you maybe to even gain more control in a different capacity.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe, and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
That's fascinating. And I think you're right. I think there's a difference between being technically proficient as a musician and actually being a performer. And you've had 2 podcasts. You're a great interviewer. You're able to express yourself really well. And that I think that has come from being in front of people, exposing yourself as a musician. It's something that we all learn, well, most of us learn, and sort of my path to be able to do a podcast and thinking that way is different to yours. But there is an essence of having to be a performer or be able to step in front of people and share information. So, Thank you for that. So let's go back to your education again. So then you went into doing a master's and a PhD in philosophy. Now,
a doctor of philosophy,
doctor.
A master's of philosophy and a doctor of philosophy, but the philosophy was neuroscience and biology. Yeah.
So where did that in your sort of journey, your course, did you think that you need to go into the philosophy area as well?
Right. So, yeah. And again, to clarify, the PhD stands for Doctor of Philosophy, but then it covers all of these different aspects. And so you're right that I was actually quite interested in the more sort of like philosophy side of things, like what is the essence of knowledge, and, how do you make a kind of like a cogent argument and stuff like that. That's part of what got me into the sciences. So it's interesting to bring it up that direction. But what happened was I had gotten out of this academic domain. Music didn't feel as academic to me. It felt a little bit more intuitive, like I said. And I was kind of craving getting back in there and kind of flexing my skills and like exercising different parts of my brain that I hadn't used in a bit. And there were all of these different avenues that were getting me more and more fascinated with the brain and how it works. So one, which came directly from music, was I learned about kind of the neuroscience of how you learn how to play music. And one of the really essential things that I learned was it's kind of simple, and maybe the knowledge is out there more, but it wasn't as obvious to me until I really dive deep into it. And there's a great book called Playing Piano for Pleasure by a guy named, I think, something Coker or something like that is the author of that. A journalist that got to interview a bunch of pianists who were professionals. Mm. And when he was done interviewing them, he'd ask them about, hey, how do you practice? How do you get better? He'd interview like Vladimir Horowitz or something and find out stuff. One of the principles he communicated was, number one, when you practice piano, you have to practice the difficult parts, not the easy parts. Sounds kind of obvious, but most people, that's what they do. That's that like prototypical bad piano player where they go, okay, let me do it. Like they keep getting that same mistake. And so what I learned there is that the way the brain works is the brain doesn't know what's right and wrong. There are certain parts of the brain that know what's right and wrong, but the motor parts of the brain, they just know what you did and you didn't do. And the way it's expressed is called Hebbian plasticity. A very simple way of expressing is to say neurons that fire together wire together.
Okay.
Which basically means whenever you do something once, you're more likely to do it another time. If you repeat it another time, you're more likely to do it another time, because literally those neurons are making a deeper connection. Mm-hmm. And that's why that person makes the mistake over and over again, is because they're not only learning the good part, they're learning the mistake. Mm-hmm. They're learning, their motor memory is learning to make that mistake every time. And so that book said, you got to slow down quite a bit. Don't pay attention to the part that you know. Pay very close attention to the part that you don't know, and make sure whatever you do, don't get that wrong. Go so slowly, go so carefully that you get it absolutely right, and then get that repetition of the right thing in there until it works. And that applies to so many things, like business and everything, right? Just like how you approach stuff. And I realized that was neuroscience. And there were other aspects of neuroscience I was interested in. I was interested in synaesthesia, which is this fascinating kind of phenomenon where people have cross-modal experiences. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a little bit hard to describe. But some people, when they hear music, they see very specific colors that correspond to the notes. Mm. Right. Or there's literally people, and this is so hard to imagine for the general population, when they eat a food, they see a color. They'll eat chicken.
Doesn't Dave Grohl have that? I think Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters, I was listening to his autobiography, and he was talking about he's never had a musical lesson in his life. He just learned, and he sees colors from when writing his own music.
Yeah. I don't know about it, but I wouldn't be surprised. You find these interesting characters historically, and usually they don't realize that nobody else experiences reality that way, right? And they think that it's normal until one day they say, hey, isn't this chicken super purple? And you're like, what the heck are you talking about, dude? So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he has it. There's a few. Nabokov is an author who people think had synesthesia as well in various domains. So I just got super fascinated with the brain, and it actually felt quite intimidating at the time, but I got fancied myself this idea, hey, maybe I could go study neuroscience. And it started with just wanting to take an official class in the topic. And it was actually so hard for me to find a place where I could just take a class in neuroscience that I ended up doing a PhD.
You were a reluctant academic.
Well, I was excited about getting into academia, but I think it's interesting because it really would start by I called up a local university in Chicago, UIC. I was like, I want to take a college level course in neuroscience. And they said, well, that's cool, but we usually don't do that unless you're an enrolled student. So let's look into getting you enrolled. This is how you do it. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess now I have to look to getting enrolled. I ran into, this is one of the craziest stories of my life, is it was actually through a band that I was in. They had a friend who was a neuroscientist, and I was talking about how I was so interested in the topic, but how it was hard for me to find ways to learn about it. She said, why don't you go volunteer for a neuroscience lab and you just hang out in there a little bit, clean after up the animals that they're doing experiments on or whatever, just kind of help out, see if you want to even go in this direction. And I took that advice, but it ended up the lab that I finally accepted me to do that. I said, I want to just come in here and I want to volunteer. And it was a bird lab. I'll just clean up after the birds. I'll clean up the cages and feed them and stuff like that. And the guy who was my mentor, his name's Ofer Chernikowski. He just was, I think, just so on board, and he saw that like I had this potential and his passion. He said, why don't you do a PhD? So he just helped me get started in that, and that I went down that line.
Fantastic. We're going to fast forward a little bit through a couple of businesses that you've run regarding pianos. So Floating Piano Factory and the masterclass, which you do. So that gave you building blocks of business, and you've run 2 successful businesses and classes. But I want to fast forward to the Run With It podcast, where you interview you were interviewing established entrepreneurs and talking to them about new ideas or other ideas they'd not thought about. How did that come about? Why did you feel that there was a need in the market for a podcast to talk about new ideas? I can see why, but just explain to me why you chose that subject.
Yeah. I mean, the basic impetus for the new ideas, I think, was my business, my partner on that project, Chris Justin. And we were in a mastermind group together, and he was like, "Hey guys, like I'm thinking about starting a podcast. I want to talk about business ideas." And I think he was looking for someone to partner with, or I volunteered, and I said, "Hey, I'll help out with that. Let's get in on that together." And so basically, we just started planning out the details of what it would be like, and just trying to think through what's the best approach to this, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and we kind of centered on the idea that we would have first of all a limit for successful business people, because initially it was like, oh, maybe we'll talk to anyone on the street about, our friends and whatever who may not have had the experience about what are their business ideas, right? We'll just talk them through and stuff. And we kind of centered on this fact, well, let's create a threshold where we talk to people who have had success already, and they share their business ideas. And that's just kind of how we got that focus. And what's really interesting about the podcast just goes to show you like all the different misperceptions we have when we're starting projects and businesses. Our idea was we would share these business ideas on the podcast. If a listener would like go through the steps to get it started, because we would give them steps to get it started, then we would offer them the opportunity to get mentorship with our podcast guest.
Okay.
And we were interviewing relatively quickly. We had people who had sold billion-dollar companies, And so we were like, internally, we were like, these are incredible opportunities. If somebody would just spend a week, like just even vaguely pursuing this business idea, we would connect them with our guests for a mentorship session. No question. Nobody took us up on it.
No one
wasn't. It just didn't become like a popular part of the thing, which I've always been baffled by. I feel like if I was a listener, I would take advantage of it. We even had friends.
Yeah, it's really interesting to say that. I'm sort of brainstorming with my team on this, and one of the things we were thinking about was offering this sort of hour coaching session, mentoring session with my guests, whether it's a product, service, whatever they produce, and I kind of have come to the conclusion I don't think people will sign up for it. I'm not really sure why, but it is a shame, because if you're offering something like that, you can get great insight from these great people. It's an interesting one. I think you're right that, well, you were right that it proved that way. But so you were thinking about new ideas. So if they had a product or service, it might be something that they sort of thought about, but didn't have the time or didn't have the bandwidth to actually run.
Yeah. And there's this philosophy that you hear, and definitely there's a crowd that thinks it's bunk, but this idea that most successful business people realize it's more about the execution than the idea. And so these people wouldn't be shy to share things. We did have people who did push back and say, what do you think I'm going to share with you? My great ideas on your podcast, forget about it, But for the most part, we found people that were willing and interested in doing that. So it worked out pretty well. And again, the idea was that they had the experience enough to share it. It's fun. It's like an outlet for them. And that was, our guests loved it. Because they were almost all entrepreneurs have shiny object syndrome. They got a ton of ideas. They wish that they could pursue them all. At least you can get on for an hour and talk about it and have fun. And so our guests just love being able to kind of like have that like psychological release of like, oh, let me just kind of have fun talking about this, and then I can get back to my day job.
Okay, let's move on to your current project, which has developed from just being not just a podcast, but a podcast into lots of different areas. But why don't you tell me first of all let's talk about what an NFT is, and then talk about your podcast, which is the Edge of NFT.
Yeah, sure. NFT stands for non-fungible token. And I'll tell a story which has worked lately to kind of give people some background. But the word fungible just basically means it could be exchanged equally. It's like an item that could be exchanged equally. There's no difference between the items of a set. And so like dollar bills is a good example of a fungible token, or like a quarter, or like a pound, right, in your currency. So if I have a euro or a pound or something like that, and I say, I'll give you my euro for your euro. Like, okay, cool. There, no problem. Like nothing has happened there when we exchange those two things that makes any difference to the value of what just happened. A non-fungible token really represents something that is unique. And so it just basically means you can't just find an equivalent and trade it very easily. And in practice, like in the NFT space, you could have a set of things that you can trade as relatively equally. But even then, they're usually on such a small set that those individual items might have a different value just because of the sort of market for them. Mm. So the story I tell is I had this kind of quirky, what I would call an art business project that started around 2015, where it asked people to invest in me. But it was very symbolic. And I would ask them to invest like $1. And I would tell them, that it represented a relatively small share, right? But it was a very symbolic thing. And they understood me. They understood my ethos and my concept and stuff like that. And so that was inspired by an artist named JSG Boggs, who actually drew pieces of currency as his art. Mm-hmm. So he would draw a $20 bill and he would go out to eat, and he would offer the waitress his drawing of a $20 bill versus like an actual $20 bill to pay the check. Mm-hmm. And pay check for like $18.50 or something like that, And if she took the art, he'd say, okay, great. Thank you. I'll need a receipt and some change. I need $1.50 change and a receipt. Thank you very much. And then what they didn't know was that there were collectors who collected this guy's art. Yes. So a collector would want the receipt, the change, which he would write into his initials on, or so he had a way of marking it, and the original piece of art. So they show up at this restaurant like a week later, having, scoured the mystery of where it would be. And they'd offer them like $40 for the $20, piece of art, or $50 or $100 or, $1,000, depending on how popular his art was at the time. So inspired by this really interesting project, what I did was those pieces, those dollar bills now became artifacts. Mm. And we have, they probably have it on most currency. There's actually a serial number on each dollar bill. Yep. And so I would take a picture with the person and me showing that bill with the serial number on it. Mm-hmm. And I have all these bills now, right, and I still have them. They're not for spending on the business. They're for creating an artifact that actually may have higher value than the original item in terms of its face value. And so the reason I tell that when I'm explaining non-fungible versus fungible is in doing that project, I was taking a fungible item and turning it into a non-fungible item by adding significance and meaning to it. Just like it happens with like coin collectors, it used to be just a penny, but it has some special, mark on it.
Stamps, things like that as well.
Exactly.
People used to collect stamps and pay an absolute fortune for rare stamps. So
exactly.
And for an NFT, it's in the digital arena. I think that's just to clarify that.
Yes.
That's the driving force behind it, is using blockchain and various technologies to be able to have that as a digital currency. So, for example, the guy who wrote who started the World Wide Web, I can't remember, Berners-Lee, he sold recently the first line of code as an NFT and sold it for thousands of pounds, whatever it was. I'm not sure the value, but that's the thing. So it could be like baseball cards, but it's actually always going to be on the digital end of it, isn't it?
Right. And just to sum that up too, right? I didn't cover that factor. This is something that blockchain technology allows us to mark both these non-fungible tokens and fungible tokens in a very clear, immutable way, which allows them to be used as currency way more efficiently than previous incarnations of digital money or digital objects. Right. And so one reason people are super excited about NFTs is it's a digital, immutable representation of ownership. So that's part of what is really special here. So you could have, people envision all sorts of implementations for record keeping purposes, really, of I have an NFT for my mortgage, right? Or my house, right? Or the piece of property, my title. And the other aspect, which I didn't highlight about NFTs, is because they're digital and they're programmed, you can program NFTs to have complex behaviors. So I can have an NFT, which I just define when it is minted, which means when it's created, where I own it every other month and you own it every other month, right? Okay. So we could have a timeshare property, whereas an NFT that represents our piece of ownership, and literally the computer program will make mine non-functional to like scan to open the door of the property, in February and April, and it'll make yours non-functional in, January and March, something like that.
So this is a fascinating area, and you've been able to make it into a business, and you've got spin-off. We'll talk about the event in a minute, but you've been able to create an ecosystem all around the podcast. Why don't you talk a little bit around the different spin-off things that have been generated from getting into NFTs and your podcast?
Yeah, sure. So we started with the Edge of NFT podcast, became a super successful project because of a lot of the levers that podcasting offers that we've been talking about, in our little group for the past couple of years, little but powerful group. And so it really turned into the Edge of Company, which is an incorporated company in the United States now, which is a media company, an events company, a technology company, all wrapped in one. And so we're putting on the NFT LA event we're in March now. So towards the end of March, the 20th to the 31st, Mark Cuban will be a speaker for that. As well as we're building some technology projects which are like sort of a little bit under the radar now, but I think, your listeners, and I think you especially, will be interested in it. You probably know a little bit about our technology projects, Mark. But and I think it's a testament to the incredible power of podcasting, which you and I have witnessed like insider kind of perspectives on, like I said, over the past year and a half or so, about podcasts are way more than, let me start a thing that's like a little show for entertainment purposes where I get advertisement. It's really like all of these networking possibilities. You're building your reputation, you're expanding your level of education and expertise in a domain. And all that really came together very especially for us because it was very concurrent with the NFT, interest in NFTs. But also like we had a great team where like the guests that we had really resonated with us and they wanted to stay involved with us and co-create with us and, do projects with us. And if we invited them to a convention to be a speaker, they wanted to be there. If we invited them to be a sponsor for that convention, they said, hell yes, we want to do that. So that's where we're at right now with the Edge of Company, events, media, technology company. And we're doing all this stuff. And it's literally been 1 year. Episode number 1 of the Edge of NFT podcast came out March 29th, 2021. What? And our event NFT LA, the second day will be March 29th, 2022. Brilliant.
Amazing. So if people are in the LA arena at the end of March, where can people get tickets?
Yeah. So I recommend just go to nftla.live to get tickets. You can get general admission tickets. You can get VIP tickets there. There's one thing which I It's like kind of like behind the scenes information, which I'll share for your listeners.
Okay.
We have an NFT project called Spirit Seed NFTs. It's actually got a lot of cool stuff that comes with owning the NFT of these spirit seeds. It's done in collaboration with Nicole Buffett, who's Warren Buffett's granddaughter, and she's very active in the NFT space and well known. But long story short, on the ticket side, you get a VIP ticket included when you purchase one of these Spirit Seed NFTs. Okay. And what most people don't realize, and I think it's because we keep it under the radar, because we kind of are giving away too much. If you were to go get a VIP ticket at NFTLA.live right now, it'd be about $2,500 US. If you were to get a Spirit Seed NFT, equivalent US dollars would be probably somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 US. So you're actually getting this NFT, which includes a VIP ticket and other utilities, including offsetting your carbon for a year, and a chance at getting other NFTs that Nicole Buffett has made that are trading for higher values. And so anyways, if people want a VIP ticket, I highly recommend they get a Spirit Seed and get the VIP that comes with it. And the website for that is spiritseeds.xyz. And if anybody's not familiar with like cryptocurrencies, NFTs, but they find that aspect interesting, I'm happy to help them, get that NFT and get that ticket and make sure they're totally on board with it.
Okay. Well, we'll say at the end where people can reach out to you, and then you can people can reach out to you that way. Would you think NFTs will be a test of time? Do you think this is something that is going to impact community, society, countries? Do you think this is actually going to continue as an aspect of business and an aspect of exchanging monetary value for these NFTs? Do you think this is something that's going to just get bigger and bigger in the 2020s?
Yeah. I think it'll be similar to the evolution of the internet and websites. So the question you asked right now makes me think of, early internet people saying, do you think websites are going to stand the test of time? Yeah. Right? Yes, they are, they were, they're going to become a essential part of our infrastructure. The thing that I think that question indicates is that there's kind of like a really ebullience around the concept right now, which, there may be things that fade into the past about what's going on right now. It could be that, some of these NFT projects that people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars investing in could really go to zero in terms of how much they're worth. But it's very much similar to like the .com bubble, where,
or even the advent of social media, that like when Facebook or Twitter first came out, everyone said, well, is this going to last? And it's just gone from strength to strength. So I kind of see it as being part of our lives going forward. There'll obviously be maybe a little bit of resistance with older people, but the millennials and Gen Zs are just going to trade as like trading cards when you're a kid, when you trade baseball cards or football cards, whatever. I just see it as becoming embedded in our society, and with the technology becoming more secure and being, as you said, the flexibility of it, you are going to be able to, as you say, not own it for a month and then pass it to someone else. And you could buy something like, I've got some pictures of cricket photos and things like that. They could easily be digitally encoded, and I could have them as a screenshot on my screen. I just feel that especially millennials and Gen Zs are just going to start trading with these just going forwards.
Yeah. A lot of our guests have brought up this Roblox, which is like a digital game that kids play where they can buy digital items and trade digital items. And the generation coming up, which sometimes we call the degen. Okay. Sometimes they might get labeled as degenerate with all those sort of like silly things that they're into, but it's also D stands for decentralized. And it also kind of just stands for like this sort of digital realm where people, they're getting less and less interested in owning physical items and have their own liabilities attached to them. And like, I like having a digital item, and that's like kids trading things in Roblox. And the other comment I want to make about what you were saying about it kind of standing the test of time, NFT, the like actual technology of it that's kind of confusing to most people may remain confusing, but it's very similar, but it may be ingrained on a sub layer that is very much consistent. You know, think about Steve Jobs taking a computer, the concept of a computer, which seems kind of like complex and nerdy, and is everybody going to care about it, and put a nice, beautiful interface on it where people can just use it for its functional purposes, and they don't have to know they don't have to know JavaScript or C++ or like whatever, but they can utilize it. And NFTs are going to play that role too, where they can recede. Nobody has to know like the details of what they are and how they work. And that's what's going on right now. There's a huge amount of economic opportunity in people doing what Steve Jobs did for the computer, taking this stuff, putting it a little bit in the background, and giving people what they care about, the utility that they care about that it offers.
100%. And I think that the whole, I've talked to lots of people who are tech people on this and sort of said the advent of AI and blockchain for me are the biggest technologies that are going to have the biggest impact on humanity. But you don't need to know how blockchain works or in essence why AI is massively impactful, because if you see the results, then you can gain benefit from the results. You don't actually need to know the technology behind it. Even things like the word blockchain might eventually just disappear from mainstream media, mainstream population. It's because they just know that they can buy their NFTs and they just log on and it's as smooth and frictionless as possible, and they can buy what they want as an NFT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we're coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. The first question is, what's the best decision that you made?
The best decision I have made, which I make over and over again, is also a difficult decision. And that is to be willing to do things differently than other people do.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, just a little bit more detail on that, to decide to go to music school, because it was an enriching experience, not necessarily. Some people go to music school thinking that that's how they're going to make their money, which some people do. But like, just to go to that and say, I'm going to do this because it fits for me. I want to explore this. It's my life. This is the direction I'm going to go, and be willing to be on a path that is less traveled, as the Robert Frost poem goes. And trust that that's the right path for me. I'll find the right way.
You're a bit of a disruptor, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so.
And you think about that even to the point of your music career as a performer, moving into creating businesses, which we haven't unfortunately had the time to talk about, but creating businesses that are running themselves and being able to do that's actually quite disruptive, the masterclass and the technician business. So I think like if there's anyone that I've had on this podcast, and I've had some disruptors, I think it's a pretty good fit for you. You look at angles, look at places where people aren't, but you see potential, and then you go for it.
Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing that I learned in everything that I've done is, if I'm going to make a disruption, let me make it in a big domain with a high impact.
Right.
Because it's a lot more worth it than trying to disrupt like a small domain where there's a small impact, because the sort of resistance that you get is just, it's not easy. You got to have the right personality to be willing to get through it. It's always that thing, what they say, like, I don't know the exact quote, but it's like when something new comes along, you have the people who say it's kind of worthless and it's a joke. And then you have people that say, oh, hey, there might be something to this. And then you get to the level where everybody forgets that there was even a question, right? That it was there. So, yeah.
Okay. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
I'll say one that I think about recently, and it wasn't necessarily advice. I was in a group of guys, and this guy that had a few more years on me, he said, when I look back on my life, I see that the low points in my life, sometimes the germ of how I got to that came from what I was doing in the high points, and vice versa. The germ of what was happening in the high points in my life came from what I was doing in the low points. And at the time, it wasn't so obvious. I might have thought I was doing the wrong thing because nothing was going well, but it was actually laying the foundation for things to be going well. And then the same thing, things are going well, and I'm doing X, Y, Z. And I think what I'm doing is making things go well, but it's actually what I used to be doing. And the thing that I'm doing now is going to make it all go to crap. So I think about that a lot. I don't know if it's the best piece of advice ever, but I've been thinking about that lately.
Okay, cool. Who helped you most in your career?
I'll give a shout out to a couple of folks here. One is to go back to a guy I mentioned earlier, Ofer Chernikovsky, who was the guy that took this musician and said, I think I can make him a neuroscientist. And actually it's interesting because, towards the end of my PhD, it was the mentor-mentee relationship came a little bit strained and difficult for me. It was a little bit hard, especially because I wanted to move out of that domain. But all that having been said, I think that act of him having that faith in me and helping me go in that direction, I think it was super powerful. And the second one is just my business partners right now, Jeff and Josh. These guys have had incredible successes, and I really appreciate, being on a team with them and being able to work with them. And I think I forget what the exact question is. Who
helped you most in your career?
Who helped me most? And I feel like they're helping me a lot right now. I feel like we're all helping each other, but I just really appreciate this opportunity.
Awesome. Do you have any regrets?
I probably have like a boatload of them, but I guess to that question, I would say I fully recognize that there's no reason to have regrets. You always have to be in the present moment or look forward. But I will acknowledge that my head, that's things come in my head all the time. I shouldn't have done this, or I should do this, or or that person did that, and I shouldn't have ever engaged with them, or just all those things. I just fight them off. They're there, and I go, okay, you're here. All right, fine. Let's just try to ignore it.
What are you most proud of?
I think it goes back to that, just being willing to be independent and try to do things in the way that makes sense to me. And yeah, I guess going back to the last question of the regrets, where I failed at doing that, where I said, I'm just going to do it the way that they said, because I don't know why, because there's a lot of pressure. But again, I can't regret. I just sort of move forward.
Cool. What does legacy mean to you?
A way to live on longer than your years, or just put something out in the world that is almost like a version of a child, like a business. I look at somebody like Walt Disney. I'm sure he has all this church followings, but the fact that he could, or JP Morgan Chase, or whatever, all these people that they built something, and it's still there. And it's just these foundations that stick around for years and continue to do really interesting and incredible things. That's what I think of when I think of legacy. And I hope to be able to do things on that level.
Fantastic. Okay, Eathan, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you, whether it's the event or whether it's just directly to you?
Yeah, nftla.live. I'll also say spiritseeds.xyz, and edgeofnft.com, as well as edgeofnft.com/Discord. As you know, we've been doing a lot of stuff in Discord, and that's a place for people to kind of engage and get to know things better, what's going on there. And I will say also, if this not too many things to give people, I'm going to create a link by the time this airs, and it will be edgeofnft.com/absolute. And what I will put there is a way for people who are listening to the podcast to get on the whitelist, for our NFT project called Living Tree NFTs. And that entitles you to have access to purchasing those NFTs before anybody else in the public does, which is, if you're not familiar with the space, it's a incredible privilege, and it means you're kind of like an insider on the project. So I'll put a way for people to do that there. And again, if they're not familiar with how to, purchase cryptocurrency, or they don't have a wallet, or they don't know a lot about NFTs, at least reach out to me, Eathan at edgeofnft.com. Pretty busy, but maybe if I can, I'll point you in the right direction or help you, kind of find your way among that stuff, because that's part of our mission, is onboarding the next billion into this space.
And we'll get all of that on the show notes. So if anyone wants to check out those links, I'll get them on there. Look, Eathan, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope the event goes amazing. And I just think it's a really interesting space, which, as we said, is just going to evolve and evolve. So well done. And I'll speak to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.